2:51 local time, Gulf of Oman. 50 kilograms of shaped explosive detonated 60 meters from the bridge of a United States Navy destroyer. Not a near miss, not a warning shot, a precision-engineered Iranian munition that threaded the gap between USS Carney's last line of air defense and the steel hull of a warship crewed by over 300 American sailors. The Combat Information Center went dark for 11 minutes. And somewhere above Saudi airspace, two aircraft that had never been publicly acknowledged as airborne were already receiving a new targeting. Solution: 38 minutes after that warhead detonated over the Gulf of Oman, a military installation outside the Iranian city of Kashan stopped functioning as a military asset, not degraded, not suppressed. Gone, command bunker, relay infrastructure, and 17 prepped Qaem airframes reduced to a single thermal anomaly on commercial satellite imagery. The IRGC Aerospace Force has not publicly acknowledged Kashan's operational status since that night. What you're about to hear is not the version Iran wants discussed. It is not the version briefed to the Senate Armed Services Committee in sanitized language. It is the operational sequence, the targeting logic, the intelligence failure that allowed the strike, the 11-minute window that nearly turned a destroyer into a casualty, and the 38-minute counter-operation that rewrote Iran's drone warfare calculus in a single night. I'm your host at Defense Beacon, where we break down critical military operations shaping global power. Tonight, we reconstruct April 18, 2026. The night a loitering munition slipped through one of the most sophisticated air defense networks in the world. And the night the United States answered with the kind of precision that leaves no ambiguity about intent. Let's start from the beginning. To understand how a drone got within 60 meters of USS Carney's bridge, you first need to understand what USS Carney was doing in the Gulf of Oman on April 18th, and why her crew was already running on reduced sleep, cycles, elevated threat posture, and a combat information center that had processed over 400 air contacts in the preceding 72 hours. USS Carney, hull designation DD-64, is an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer. Full load displacement of approximately 9,200 ton, length 505 feet. She carries the ANSPY-1D phased array radar, the Aegis combat system, Standard Missile 2 and SM-6 interceptors in a 96-cell vertical launch system, and 2 rolling airframe missile launchers for close-in defense against subsonic threats. On paper, she is one of the most capable surface combatants in the world against aerial threats. She had proven that. In 2023 and 2024, USS Carney intercepted ballistic missiles and drones during Irgun Houthi strikes in the Red Sea corridor. Her crew knew the threat envelope. They had lived it. But the Gulf of Oman in April 2026 was a different operational environment than the Red Sea in 2024. And that difference is where the story begins. Following the expansion of Iranian naval harassment operations in late 2025, NAVCENT, Naval Forces Central Command, repositioned several surface combatants into the Gulf of Oman to maintain persistent presence along Strait of Hormuz approach. The logic was sound. Iran had been testing the edges of international maritime corridors with increasing frequency since November 2025, using fast attack craft harassment, GPS spoofing operations against commercial vessels, and what NAVCENT classified as probing sorties by unmanned aerial systems. USS Carney arrived on station in the Gulf of Oman on April 3rd as part of a 3-ship surface action group. By April 15th, the other 2 vessels had rotated east for a scheduled logistics rendezvous. Carney remained on station alone as the designated presence asset for the Hormuz corridor. This is the first thing worth understanding about April 18th. A single destroyer maintaining presence in a contested maritime environment, her crew cycling through watch rotations that had been running continuous elevated alert for 15 days. Not degraded, but human. And what the Iranians had spent 41 days engineering was a strike architecture specifically designed to exploit the gap between human cognitive load and machine reaction time. I spent hours going through the available after-action documentation and open-source technical analysis, and one detail kept pulling me back, not the munition itself, not the targeting, the 41 days, because that number doesn't appear in initial reporting. It surfaces only in fragmented after-action language from Defense News, reporting on what officials described as a declassified assessment extract. 41 days of NSA tracking on an encrypted command and control uplink. 41 days during which the United States government knew something about the Qaem 114 program's operational infrastructure and had not yet acted on it. That timeline matters enormously to everything that came after. The Qaem 114 is the system the IRGC Aerospace Force did not want discussed in Western defense circles. It is not a Shahed 136, it is not the lawnmower engine, loitering munition that Ukrainian air defenses and Red Sea task force vessels had become proficient at intercepting with everything, from phalanx silos to small arms fire. The Qaem 114 is a different category of threat, a heavier, winged loitering munition that Iranian defense industry sources have described as an evolution of the Shahed 238 jet-propelled variant. Estimated cruise speed, between 350 and 450 kilometers per hour, depending on payload configuration. Operational range, assessed at over 500 kilometers with onboard fuel. Warhead, a 50-kilogram shaped charge optimized for anti-surface penetration, not blast, but focused high-velocity fragmentation designed to defeat shipboard armor and penetrate combat information centers. The Qaem 114 is not designed to saturate air defenses through mass. It defeats air defenses through signature management, flight path engineering, and timing precision. On the night of April 17th through early April 18th, one of them did exactly that. The operational planning behind the April 18th strike had been running, according to subsequent intelligence assessments, since early March 2026. The IRGC Aerospace Force's Drone Warfare Directorate had identified USS Carney's patrol pattern in the Gulf of Oman through commercial AIS data, monitoring overhead imagery from Iranian surveillance platforms and signals intelligence derived from observing Carney's radar emission patterns over multiple weeks. They were not building a mass drone strike. They were building a single-asset precision operation using atmospheric conditions as a penetration tool. This is where the thermal inversion layer becomes critical. The Gulf of Oman in mid-April experiences predictable atmospheric layering in the pre-dawn hours. As surface temperatures drop overnight and the water radiates absorbed heat upward, a thermal inversion layer forms, typically between 150 and 400 meters altitude, where a warmer air mass sits above cooler surface air. For radar systems, this creates a propagation anomaly. Radar energy traveling upward through the inversion boundary can be refracted, bent back toward the surface, or dispersed laterally, creating detection gaps at specific altitudes and ranges. Iranian drone operators had studied this effect. Western analysts had too, but the specific behavior of the Qaem 114's radar cross-section with Gulf of Oman thermal inversion had not been fully characterized. That gap is what the IRGC exploited. The Qaem 114 that targeted USS Carney was not launched from Iranian territory. Launch point reconstruction, based on subsequent trajectory analysis, placed the origin approximately 140 kilometers northeast of Carney's position from a maritime platform, likely a disguised commercial vessel in international waters. This gave the munition a sea-skimming initial trajectory before it climbed to exploit the inversion layer. Carney's AN Spy-1D radar was active and scanning. The SLQ-32 electronic warfare system was operational. The ship was, by every standard metric, at a state of readiness commensurate with elevated threat posture. The Qaem 114 rode the inversion layer at approximately 280 meters, presenting a radar cross-section that preliminary post-strike analysis estimated at under 0.5 square meters, comparable to a large bird, well below the automatic engagement thresholds programmed for that threat environment, where nuisance tracks from commercial aviation and marine wildlife were constant background noise. When the CIC watch team first flagged the contact, it was classified as anomalous, not a definitive threat, an anomaly. The contact was assigned a track designation and monitored. The evaluation sequence, identify, classify, authorize, response, was initiated according to standing rules of engagement. Less than 4 minutes remained between initial track acquisition and detonation. In those 4 minutes, a watch team had to move a contact from anomalous to classified threat to authorized engagement to engaged against a target whose speed, altitude, and radar signature did not match the established IRGC drone attack profiles the crew had been briefed on. They did not make it through that sequence in time. The rolling airframe missile system, Carney's last layer defense against subsonic aerial threats, was activated. It fired. The Qaem 114's terminal approach geometry, combined with its speed and the angular relationship between the inversion layer exit point and the ship's starboard side, meant the ram intercepted them too late. The munition-shaped charge detonated at a lateral standoff of approximately 60 meters from the starboard bridge wing. The fragmentation pattern was not random. A shaped warhead of the Qaem 114's design generates a focused fragmentation jet, thousands of high-velocity particles moving in a directional cone optimized for defeating hardened surface at 60 meters lateral distance. The fragmentation cone did not hit armor, it hit glass, sensor apertures, antenna arrays on the superstructure, and it hit people. The executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kellner, was on the bridge wing conducting a routine horizon observation. The fragmentation reached her position. She sustained multiple fragment wounds to the right arm and shoulder. She was alive. She was medevaced within 40 minutes by helicopter from the Surface Action Group's repositioned escort. But she was not present for the operational decisions that followed. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Webb, a radar systems technician conducting a routine inspection of the port side antenna mounts when the detonation occurred, sustained minor lacerations from secondary debris and was treated aboard ship. 2 other sailors on the starboard weather deck sustained acoustic injuries from the overpressure wave. The casualty count, by any historical measure of naval combat, was extraordinarily low, a product of the shaped warhead's directional design, which concentrated its energy in a forward cone rather than a spherical blast pattern. The munition was not optimized to kill people. It was optimized to kill systems. Inside the CIC, the effect of the detonation was less about physical fragmentation and more about disruption. The shaped charged metallic liner, vaporized on detonation, produced an electromagnetic pulse effect that coupled catastrophically with several of Carney's combat system processor arrays. The Aegis combat system experienced a cascade fault across its primary engagement coordination network. Backup systems began cycling. For 11 minutes, USS Carney's combat systems were degraded, not destroyed, not offline, degraded, running on backup architectures, reduced processing capacity, slower engagement timelines. 11 minutes during which, if a second wave had been inbound, Carney's defensive capacity would have been materially compromised. No second wave came. The 11-minute window tells us something important about what the IRGC was actually attempting on April 18th. This was not a strike designed to sink USS Carney. A 50-kilogram shaped warhead detonating 60 meters from a destroyer's hull does not sink a ship of that displacement and survivability. What it was designed to do is demonstrate capability. It demonstrates that an Iranian-developed loitering munition can defeat the defensive architecture of an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. It signals that the IRGC Aerospace Force has crossed a threshold. The message to every naval commander in NAVCENT and every allied maritime force in the region was direct. The cost of presence in the Gulf of Oman has changed. What's most striking about this strike is the intended audience. It was not purely about USS Carney. The IRC was sending a signal to political leadership in Washington as much as to the ship itself. And here is the piece that didn't make initial reporting. At 034 on April 18th, 13 minutes after the Qaem 14 detonated, 2 B-2 Spirit. Stealth bombers airborne over Saudi airspace pivoted onto a new targeting solution. They had not been redirected in response to the strike on Carney. They had been airborne for that targeting solution since 2340 on April 17th, more than 3 hours before the munition detonated. The NSA SIGINT track, the 41 days of monitoring on the Qaem 14's encrypted command and control relay architecture, had already produced actionable targeting package. The decision to pre-position the B-2s had been made before the strike on Carney occurred. This reframes everything about April 18th. The United States did not respond to the strike on USS Carney with a retaliatory operation planned. Anger. The retaliatory operation was already in motion before the strike happened. What the strike on Carney did was remove the final political friction around executing the targeting package. It provided the authorization that had been pending. Let's talk about the NSA track, because 41 days of monitoring on a specific command and control uplink is an extraordinary piece of persistent intelligence collection, and understanding how it was achieved explains why the Kashan strike was possible. The Qaem 114's command and control architecture uses encrypted frequency-hopping radio links between the munition and a ground-based relay network. The relay network is designed to route commands through multiple nodes, making attribution of the control origin more difficult. Standard SIGINT collection can detect the encrypted transmissions, but not immediately geolocate the relay hubs. The frequency hopping and the multi-node architecture are specifically designed to defeat that attribution. What the NSA track apparently achieved over 41 days was correlation analysis. By collecting signal intercepts across multiple 114 test and operational missions and mapping the timing, frequency characteristics, and directional vectors of the relay transmissions, analysts were able to triangulate the location of a primary relay hub. The hub was located at a converted civilian airfield outside Kashan, a city in Isfahan province in central Iran, approximately 230 kilometers south of Tehran. Converting civilian infrastructure for military drone relay purposes is not new. It is exactly the kind of dual-use facility that creates classification difficulty. It looks a civilian until you understand the electronic signatures coming from it. Once the NSA analysis had sufficient intercept density, it could distinguish the Qaem 114 relay signatures from the background noise of legitimate civilian airport communications. The Kashan facility, according to the Defense Assessment Extract, housed not just the C2 relay infrastructure but also a forward storage and preparation area for Qaem 114 airframes, 17 prepped airframes, 17 munitions that had already been fueled, programmed with targeting data, and staged for operational deployment. Put yourself in the position of the National Security Council principals when that targeting package arrived. You have NSA confirmation of a relay hub actively coordinating 14 operations. You have imagery confirming 17 prep munitions in a forward staging configuration. You have 2 B-2s already airborne and pre-positioned. And you have a destroyer in the Gulf of Oman whose executive officer was just medivist, and whose combat systems were degraded by one of the munitions from that program. The authorization decision took less than 12 minutes. Here's the take that will generate disagreement. The 41-day wait was itself the real intelligence failure of April 18th. The NSA had been tracking this architecture since early March. The targeting package for Kashan was mature enough to brief to senior officials by at least April 10th, based on the timeline fragments in available reporting. The decision to pre-position the B-2s on April 17th suggests the authorization process was already in its final stages. But 17 prepped airframes means the facility had been at operational readiness for days before the strike, and during that window, USS Carney was in the water, her crew running continuous alert cycles, unknowingly within range of munitions that Washington already had a targeting solution against. The question of when authorization should have come is not a comfortable one. At 034, the 2 B-2 Spirits pivoted. Their flight path brought them to weapons release position over the Gulf of Oman, approaching from the south to minimize radar exposure to Iranian coastal defense networks. Each aircraft carried GBU-28 laser-guided bunker busters and GBU-31 JDAM variants, a mixed payload designed for both hard and underground structure and surface facilities. The B-2 Spirit specs are worth understanding in the context of what it was about to do. Wingspan, 172 feet. Subsonic cruise speed at high altitude. Radar cross-section classified, but assessed at well under 0.1 square meters, and likely smaller than the Qaem 14 that had just defeated USS Carney's air defenses. The B-2 had been in service since 1997. It had flown strike missions from Missouri to Afghanistan to Libya to Iraq. It was built for exactly this: penetrating defended airspace without detection to deliver precision munitions against hardened targets. The Kashan facility was not defended with the air defense density of Iran's nuclear sites. It was a converted civilian airfield, radar coverage, some surface-to-air missile batteries of the Tor or Panzer class in the SS configuration, but not the layered S-300 or S-400 architecture protecting higher priority Iranian strategic assets. The IRGC Aerospace Force had placed their drone relay hub at a location that balanced operational convenience, proximity to central Iran's road, Network for logistics against survivability from air attack. They had assessed that the United States would not strike a civilian airfield inside Iranian territory without the kind of provocation that a direct attack on a U.S. warship would constitute. They were right about the trigger. They miscalculated on the response timeline and the pre-positioning of assets. The weapons release phase began at approximately 0329. At an operational altitude of roughly 40,000 feet, outside the effective engagement envelope of the assessed air defense systems around Kashan, the B-2s released their ordnance, GBU-31 JDAM GPS and inertially guided bombs, against the surface facilities of the Kashan airfield. The relay infrastructure housing, the communications antennas, the electrical supply systems that powered the command and control architecture. A 2-pound bomb impacting within 3 meters of its designated target produces total structural destruction across a significant radius. GBU-28's 4 700-pound laser-guided penetrating munitions against the bunker structure housing the command facility. The GBU-28 was specifically designed after the Gulf War to defeat hardened underground facilities. Its penetrating nose bores through reinforced concrete before detonation. Against a bunker constructed to civilian airfield standards rather than military hardening specifications, the effect was comprehensive. The 17 prepped Qaem airframes in the forward staging area were struck by JDAM impacts that initiated the munitions, propellant, and warhead assemblies through sympathetic detonation. 17 shaped charge warheads, 850 kilograms of explosive material, detonating within seconds of each other in a confined staging facility. The thermal signature was visible on commercial satellite imagery within 20 minutes. At 0329, the attack sequence began. At 3:47, the last munition impacted. 18 minutes of weapons effects. 38 minutes after the Qaem and 14 detonated off Carney's bridge, Kashan's operational infrastructure was gone. One detail from the after-action analysis stuck with me, and I went back to the available intelligence fragments 3 times to verify it. The relay hub destruction was confirmed not just by imagery, but by signals intelligence. The encrypted frequency hopping transmissions that NSA had been tracking for 41 days went silent at 0330. 2 minutes into the strike sequence, when the initial JDAM impacts destroyed the power infrastructure feeding the relay antennas. 41 days of tracking, 2 minutes of ordnance. The signature simply stopped. In the hours immediately after the Kashan strike, the crew of USS Carney was in a strange operational limbo. Their combat systems were cycling back to full capacity after the degradation window. Damage control teams had completed their initial sweeps of the superstructure, documenting fragmentation scoring across the bridge wing's armored glass, the destroyed antenna arrays on the starboard mast, and the sensor apertures that had taken direct fragment hits. The engineering logs from that morning record 7 separate damage notations, each one a data point in the post-strike survivability assessment that naval engineers would spend months analyzing. The commanding officer, Commander Daniel Yates, had shifted tactical command temporarily to the combat systems officer during the Aegis Cascade fault. When primary systems restored, his first outgoing transmission was not a damage report. It was a request for updated air picture coverage of the northern Gulf of Oman, specifically whether any additional contacts with the Qaem 114's profile were airborne. The answer from NavCen's air coordination network was negative. But the fact that Yates's first instinct was to ask that question tells you everything about the threat calculus his crew was operating under. The URGC Aerospace Force's response in the immediate aftermath of the Kashan strike was silence, no public acknowledgement. No statement from the Revolutionary Guard's public affairs apparatus, no Iranian government confirmation that a military facility had been struck. The URGC standard practice after a setback of this magnitude is to deny the adversary the political benefit of acknowledged success. Confirms that Kashan was an operational facility. They confirm that the United States struck a legitimate military target and inflicted serious damage on their drone warfare program. The silence itself became the confirmation. Commercial satellite imagery published by Maxar Technologies and Planet Labs in the days following April 18th showed thermal scarring, structural collapse, and debris patterns across approximately 340,000 square meters of the converted airfield's military sector. The imagery analysts who examined the release noted the characteristics of sympathetic detonation. The dispersal pattern consistent with multiple explosive devices detonating in rapid sequence from a common storage facility. The URGC Aerospace Force had lost their forward Qaem relay architecture and their forward munition stockpile in a single night. More significantly, they had demonstrated inadvertently that the NSA could track their drone C2 network signals with sufficient precision to geolocate relay infrastructure that has operational consequences extending far beyond Kashan. What do you think? Was the 41-day intelligence hold before acting on the Kashan targeting package a necessary operational discipline, or did it put USS Carney's crew at unnecessary risk? The comments have been running on this question across defense forums since the assessment fragments leaked, and the split is sharper than most people expect. The consequences that unfolded in the days and weeks following April 18th didn't arrive through a single channel. They arrived in layers. The most immediate was logistical and operational for the URGC. 17 Qaem 114 airframes represent a meaningful fraction of assessed production capacity. Iranian defense industry analysis suggests Qaem 114 production at specialized facilities runs at approximately 6 to 12 units per month, depending on component supply chain availability, a supply chain that has been progressively degraded by Western sanctions targeting precision components. The loss of 17 prepped airframes represents a minimum setback of 1 to 3 months of operational inventory, potentially longer if the Kashan facility was serving as this primary forward staging node for Gulf of Oman operations. The command bunker destruction carries a different kind of consequence. Physical infrastructure can be rebuilt. Personnel with operational expertise in Qaem 114, targeting and relay network management. The officers and technical staff who had been running the 41-day operational cycle that culminated in the April 18th strike are not replaceable on a short timeline. If those personnel were present at the Kashan command facility during the strike, which operational security practices would typically mandate for a live operational mission, the human capital lost to the IRGC Aerospace Force's Drone Warfare Directorate was substantial. In the week following the strike, Iranian state media ran a brief segment on what it described as an accident at a test facility in Isfahan province. A cover story so that Western intelligence analysts noted it publicly. The framing was intended for a domestic audience, not an international one. Within Iran, the Kashan strike had to be explained somehow. The official line chose industrial accident over military defeat. That choice communicates how seriously the IRGC assessed the Kashan loss, acknowledging American precision strike capability against Iranian territory was considered worse than the reputational cost of an unexplained industrial accident. Iran's international posture required a response that acknowledged neither the full extent of the Kashan damage nor Iran's responsibility for the Carney strike. Tehran issued a statement through its foreign ministry condemning what it characterized as American aggression against civilian infrastructure on Iranian territory, implicitly acknowledging something had happened at Kashan while denying the military nature of the facility. The United States responded through CENTCOM with a brief statement confirming a precision strike on an IRGC drone infrastructure facility, identified as the operational origin of the attack on USS Carney. The diplomatic consequences spread outward. 3 Gulf Cooperation Council member states, whose governments quietly support American naval presence in the region while publicly maintaining carefully calibrated neutrality, privately communicated their concern about the escalatory trajectory through diplomatic channels. Specifically, they raised whether the Kashan strike's public attribution model, the United States explicitly acknowledging a strike inside Iranian territory in response to drone attacks, would accelerate Iranian asymmetric retaliation against regional infrastructure those states depend on. Their concern was noted. It was not acted upon in the sense of modifying the public attribution strategy, but it has shaped subsequent NAVCEN operational posture in ways that have not been publicly disclosed. The congressional dimension of April 18th is still unfolding. The House Armed Services Committee convened a classified briefing on April 23rd, 5 days after the strike. The unclassified summary indicates that committee members raised pointed questions about 2 things. First, the decision to maintain USS Carney as a single-ship presence asset without task group support in a threat environment categorized at elevated risk. Second, the 41-day intelligence collection window and the authorization timeline for the Kashan targeting package. The second question is the one with doctrinal implications. The committee's concern centers on the criteria for pre-authorization of B-2 employment against targets inside Iran. The pre-positioning of 2 B-2s over Saudi airspace before the strike on authorization derived from intelligence alone rather than in response to a kinetic attack is a posture that several committee members characterized as operating at the outer edge of the War Powers Notification Framework. The Pentagon's response to that concern has not been made public. On the tactical level, USS Carney's 11-minute combat systems degradation window revealed something that naval engineers and Aegis program managers have been reluctant to discuss publicly: the electromagnetic vulnerability profile of the CIC's processor architecture to shape charge detonation effects at close, lateral standoff distances had not been fully characterized in survivability testing. The fragmentation-derived electromagnetic coupling that produced the cascade fault was not the primary design threat that the CIC's hardening specifications were built around. The Navy's response has been to initiate a rapid review of CIC hardening specifications across the Arleigh-Burke class, specifically examining the electromagnetic shielding of primary combat system processor arrays against the lateral fragmentation and EMP coupling effects that the Qaem 114's warhead produced at 60 meters. This is not a small engineering problem. There are over 70 Arleigh-Burke destroyers in the United States Navy. Retrofitting revised electromagnetic hardening across that hull series is a years-long program at significant cost. The Qaem 114, in a single operational mission, has generated $1 billion engineering consequence for the United States Navy. Here's what this tells us about the state of drone warfare in 2026. The assumption that underpinned Western naval air defense posture for most of the past decade, that loitering munitions were a low-NC asymmetric threat manageable through layered close-in defense systems, has been operationally invalidated. Not in the South China Sea against peer competition, not in a high-intensity conflict scenario that strategic planners had modeled extensively. In the Gulf of Oman by an Iranian system that exploited atmospheric physics, radar propagation characteristics, and the cognitive limits of watch teams running continuous elevated alert cycles. The Qaem 114 did not succeed because it was technologically superior to USS Carney's defensive systems in absolute terms. It succeeded because the engagement architecture, the time window, the threat profile, the atmospheric conditions, the watch team's classification sequence, combined to produce a window narrower than the time required to complete the engagement authorization cycle. That is a systems problem. It applies to every surface combatant operating in an elevated threat maritime environment where adversaries have had time to study the gaps. There's an open question the intelligence community has not publicly resolved, and it matters for assessing what happens next. The 41 days of NSA tracking on the Kashan relay architecture. How did the IRGC not know had been penetrated? 41 days of signals collection against a frequency-hopping encrypted network implies either a significant technical capability that the NSA developed and kept operationally secure, or a counterintelligence failure inside the IRGC Aerospace force that allowed collection to proceed undetected. If it was the former, the capability may still be usable against successor relay architectures Iran is now constructing. If it was the latter, Iran has identified the penetration and adapted. The distinction determines whether the intelligence advantage from April 18th is replicable or one-time. Will the IRGC drone warfare program recover from Kashan within 6 months? Or is the combination of infrastructure loss and supply chain constraint sufficient to delay reconstitution past the end of 2026? Comment yes or no, because the analysts tracking Iranian defense production are genuinely split on this, and the split has direct implications for NAVCENT force posture decisions being made right now. The strategic picture that April 18th leaves behind is one of demonstrated capability matched to demonstrated vulnerability on both sides. Iran demonstrated that its drone warfare directorate can develop a system capable of defeating an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer's layered air defense through signature management, atmospheric exploitation, and precise engagement timing. That capability does not disappear with the destruction of Kashan. The knowledge, the design parameters, the operational lessons from the April 18th mission, those are distributed across the IRGC institutional architecture in ways that a single strike cannot eliminate. The next relay hub will be hardened differently. The next forward staging area will be dispersed. The next Qaem operational mission will account for the fact that the NSA tracked the April 18th Operation C2 architecture for 41 days. The United States demonstrated that 2 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, pre-positioned on an intelligence-derived targeting solution, can deliver 38 minutes of precision effects against a target inside Iranian territory without being intercepted. That carries its own message to Iranian air defense commanders, to IRGC Aerospace force planners, and to every regional actor watching the exchange. The threshold for B-2 employment against Iranian targets is lower than it was on April 17th. The authorization cycle is faster than Iranian planners had likely modeled. The question that neither Washington nor Tehran is answering publicly is the one that will determine whether April 18th was a contained exchange or the opening of a sustained escalatory cycle. Kashan was a relay hub, the Qaem 114 program's research and development infrastructure, its primary manufacturing capacity, its senior technical and operational leadership. Those assets are elsewhere, deeper inside Iran, better protected, harder targets. The NSA's 41-day track on the Kashan relay architecture tells us that persistent SIGINT collection against the Qaem program is ongoing, which means targeting packages are being built against assets beyond Kashan, which means the authorization question. When does the threshold for employing B-2s against Iranian territory shift from in response to a direct attack on U.S. forces to in response to assessed intent is not closed. USS Carney is back in operational status. Lieutenant Commander Kellner has been reported as recovering from her injuries. The 11 minutes of degraded combat system operation have been analyzed, documented, and incorporated into the engineering review program. The Navy has publicly stated that modifications to watch team alert protocols and RAM engagement authorization timelines are being implemented across the surface fleet. The IRGC Aerospace Force has not publicly acknowledged Kashan, and 2 B-2 Spirits returned to Whiteman Air Force Base, their crews debriefed, their aircraft back at operational readiness, available to be pre-positioned again the moment the next targeting package is mature. The 38 minutes between the detonation off Carney's bridge and the last munition impact at Kashan were not an anomaly. They were a demonstration of what integrated, persistent intelligence collection married to pre-positioned precision strike capability looks like in practice. They were also a demonstration of what it costs to wait 41 days before using that capability, measured in fragments from a shaped warhead, in 11 minutes of degraded systems, in one executive officer's metavist over the Gulf of Oman in the pre-dawn dark. The Qaem 114 got within 60 meters of USS Carney's bridge in a future engagement against a ship whose electromagnetic hardening has been reviewed and updated, against watch teams operating with revised engagement authorization timelines that account for the Qaem threat profile. Maybe that closing distance becomes 150 meters. Maybe it becomes a clean intercept. Maybe it becomes something worse. Because the IRGC has already started building the next version, the one that accounts for everything they learned from watching how the United States responded to April 18th. That is the nature of the exchange ongoing in the Gulf of Oman. Not a war, not deterrence in the classical sense. Something in between, a continuous operational conversation conducted in radar signatures and shaped charges and signals intelligence and precision, munitions, each answer generating the next question, each strike producing the lessons that inform the next strike. Subscribe to Defense Beacon if you want to follow where this operational conversation goes next, because the next chapter of the Qaem 114 story, the one involving what Iran builds to replace the 17 airframes at Kashan, and where they stage them, and whether the NSA has already started the clock on that location, that chapter is already being written. April 18th, 2026, 60 meters from the bridge, 38 minutes. The Gulf of Oman registers every exchange, and so does the intelligence apparatus watching from 41 days out.